In this video, I will be demonstrating the writing of the JavaScript to implement a relatively simple bug or issue tracker using a combination of CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. To start off with, I have the skeleton of the HTML all set up to track some information about bugs and to create an error dialog if some information is not entered in. To go over the specifics of this, let me first show what the final result looks like. Opening up the code in a browser, we see that we have on the top right hand side of this page a space to enter bug information. We can enter the name of the bug, we can type in the description, the name of the person who has identified the bug, and the date that bug was identified. We also have a submit button below that. This, as you will note if you take a look at the HTML coding, is within a table. This table uses Bootstrap's table styling to get the table displayed as it is. This table is part of Bootstrap's grid formatting system with rows and specific columns. The result of entering bugs in here is going to be a list of bugs presented under the insertion point, and that would be this div known as the listing div. In addition to this, we have something that is known as a modal in Bootstrap also implemented. What this modal provides is a manner in which to display an error message. As you will see, there is some pre-selected or predefined structure to this modal. The structure of this modal has been taken from Bootstrap's modal samples and customized to this bug or issue tracker. Please note, when certain conditions are met, an error message saying that please fill in all the fields for the bug will show up, and there'll be a close button that will close this model. The JavaScript is present at the lower end of this HTML document, and there's nothing there at the moment, and we're going to work on filling it out. Please also note that there is some styling that has been applied to the grid columns, to the table rows, and to certain divs and classes within the HTML document. So let's get started writing some JavaScript. The first thing we want to do is we want to be able to track multiple bugs using the system. That requires a data structure that allows us to store these bugs. Consequently, we can have an array called list of bugs initialized in JavaScript that allows us to store the multiple bugs that a user might enter in, or that multiple users might enter in. Now, once a user enters bug information in, such as the name, the description, the person is identified, and the date and time the bug was identified, and clicks this button, submit button, we want to actually register the bug and store information of that bug in this array known as list of bugs. And so what we can do is we can have add an event listener, and we're going to add an event listener to the button, the submit button, with the ID turn in. And so this is the action of someone turning in a bug, and we're going to add an event listener, and the event listener we're going to add is click, and once they click that button, we're going to register a bug. Now, register bug is a function that's going to be actually executed once the person clicks that turn in button. And so let's write that function out. So once someone clicks on that button, here's what we're going to do. We are actually going to get the values for the name of the bug, the description, the identified date, and identified by, and the date identified. And so I will have a couple of variables over here. I will have bug name, and get the value of bug name. And consequently, I will do this for the other fields as well. And so I have bug name, I have bug description, and so we see bug description has the ID bug disk. And so I have the 4 values that a user enters in there. Now, remember that I mentioned that when someone does not enter in the fields for the bug, we might want to throw up an error message. And that we want to maybe capture using this ability of a modal, the Bootstrap modal. And so one thing we can do is we can check for the length of these values. And so we can say if the length of any of those fields is 0, that means a person did not either enter in a bug name, a bug description, or identified by, we want to pop that modal up. Now, that modal is something that's very specific to Bootstrap, and please notice, in addition to importing the style sheet associated with Bootstrap, I also imported some JavaScript uh, libraries associated with Bootstrap, specifically jQuery and Popper and Bootstrap Min JS. And what these JavaScript libraries do is they provide us a set of JavaScript functions that allow us to work with some Bootstrap elements. And so what you're going to now see is a little bit of jQuery to get that modal to show up. And the way we do that and because it's jQuery, and I've got to specify the name of the modal, or the name of the modal element, and the name of the modal element is ERR modal, and it's an ID, it's a div, and I will say modal dot show. I want to show this modal, right? And it's that simple. And once the modal is shown, I want to make sure that I don't allow the user to do anything else. And so I will return or I will end this function. I won't go ahead because the user has not completed entering in all the pieces of information. And subsequently, I will return or terminate this function, and I won't move forward with registering of the bug or doing anything of that nature, right? And so this completes the first part of the register bug function, which is kind of the error checking component of it, which is making sure that people have entered things in. Let's make sure this works. And so if I click, I've entered nothing in, and I click submit, notice I have an error message that shows up. This is the modal. And if I close this, that disappears. Now, if I type something in, such as the name of the bug, and I click submit. I don't get that error message. Obviously, nothing is happening right now because I haven't really written the register bug function out, but the error message does not come through. And so we know at least the modal works. Now, once we actually have data in under bug name, bug description, identified by, and date ident. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not checking the length of date ident. Again, this is a choice that one might make depending on your personal preference. You might actually want to check the length of date identified, or you might not. It's really a personal preference. I just stopped at 3, but you can include date ident if you'd like, as well as part of the conditional check. But once I have data that's actually present in these variables or in these fields, what I can do is I can go ahead and determine a way to store them. Now, notice that I have an array called list of bugs that's supposed to actually store this bug-related information. Now, one of the things I could do is I could take each row of list of bugs and associate each row with one value of each form. And so, one bug would take up like 4 form fields because I'd have bug name in one position, bug description, identified by, and date ident in 2 other positions. So I'd have 4 positions dedicated for each bug. Now, and that's not really a great way to go about storing a list of associated fields or associated data. A better way of doing that is to consider each bug an object. And so we can have a variable known as a bug. And this can be an object where you have a key and a value associated with that key. And so what this does is it creates an object known as a bug, and it associates all the different form fields together and creates them as attributes or values of this object known as a bug. And what I can then do is I can take this bug and insert it in the array. And so to do that, I can do list of bugs dot push. Now, you're going to see me do something over here that's a little bit different. Now, you could do very simply, you could push a bug in here, just very simply, and you could leave this as it is, and this would work just fine. But I'm gonna do a slight twist on this, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run an operation known as JSON.stringify. Now, the reason I'm going to do this is because an object can be stored in an array in a variety of different ways. And sometimes it gets harder to retrieve objects from an array and parse through that object. And so what JSON stringify does is it's a function that takes an object and creates the string version of an object and stores the string version of that object in the array, right? And so the stringify function is taking this object, this JavaScript object, and representing it as a string, and storing that string in that position, in whatever position, in the last position of list of bugs, right? Depending on which bug I'm entering in here, right? And so that that really completes what register bug is supposed to do. Register bug, the only purpose of registering a bug is to read data in, check the data, create a bug object, and push that bug object into list of bugs. Now, just to make sure we actually have this bug that we've registered, uh, in in the array, we could do console.log list of bugs, and that's going to make sure, and that's going to tell us whether there is actually something in list of bugs once we've gone through this process. So we can check whether this works, and I'm going to make sure that we can actually see the JavaScript console. And so let's type in the name of a bug. And if I submit this, you will see that the console.log has printed me out the current contents of the array, which is the first bug that we just typed in with browser error, bug description, identified by, date identified, so on and so forth. Okay, now, well, this is great. We might actually, as we enter bugs in, so I can kind of do something more over here. Let's say I have a browser error. Maybe I have uh, button not working. Now, obviously, there's one of the things that I've not done is once a bug is entered in, I might actually want to set the input values to blank out, right? To blank them out. I haven't done that, but that's one of those kinds of improvements that you might think about. Um, you know, and then I'm submitting the second bug, and you'll notice that I have now two bugs in here. The first one browser error, and the second one button not working, right? And so we know that this works, and the array is getting populated. And so every time I add an error, um, that error is getting loaded into the array. Now the problem with this is that there's no display that's telling me that there is actually like this storage that's happening in the back end, right? Other than the console log that I see in front of me. One great way to do that would be as I type these bugs and issues in, I have a listing down here that tells me that this is the first bug, this is the second bug, this is the third bug that a user might have entered in here, right? And so what we might want to do is we might actually want to render the list of bugs that are present in that array, right? And so what we can do is we can actually create a function for this. And so let's call this render the bug list. Right, so we have a function called render bug list. And what I'm going to do is to render, that should be render. And what I want to do is actually I want to render that bug list into this div over here with the ID listing. Right? So I want to change the inner HTML of listing that allows me to render the entire list of bugs. So to do that, I'm going to start off by creating a variable, the list HTML, and set it to be blank so that there's like no content in there. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to do this thing. So all my errors, all my bugs are present, should be present in the array. And by looping through the array, I should be able to go through all the bugs that a user has entered in or users have entered in. And so I can say for I is equal to 0, I less than the list of bugs length and I plus plus. And so I can just create a loop, and what this loop is going to go and do is it's going to loop through the entire length of list of bugs. And what I'm going to do now is there are lots of different ways that I can render this list of bugs, and I'm going to go to my favorite way to render something, a list like this, is to use Bootstrap cards, and so each bug becomes a separate card that's rendered over there, right? And so I'm going to say the list HTML plus equal to now one of the reasons I have created this, and so I over here is a counter. It's a way for me to track which error um, is being associated with which element in the array, right? And so obviously the first error is in the 0th position, and so I'm using that ID. I'm using the position of an error in the array to identify that error in the HTML through this ID element over here. Now, because I converted the bug object into a string and stored it in list of bugs, so as I converted the bug object into a string and then stored in a list of bugs, as I retrieve the string from the list of bugs, what I've actually got to do is I've got to parse through the string. And so there is a parse function. And what the JSON parse function allows me to parse the ith element of the list of bugs. And so I'm going to say list of bugs, parse through the ith element of the list of bugs, and get the specific element related to bug name, because bug name is what I want to print out. Right? And so that's what that's going to do. Is it's going to parse through the ith element of list of bugs. So it's going to convert that string back into an object once again, and then get the bug name key from that object. And so this is going to be pretty long, because what I want to do is I want to have bug number displayed on one line, and then I want to have bug name identified by and date identified on a second line. And on the third line, I want to have the description of the bug, right? So what you're going to see is all the HTML and JavaScript kind of mixed together to give me that result. And finally, I'm closing off the divs up here, the class, the card body div, and the card class div. I'm just going to throw a break at the end of that. And so what this does, this render bug list does, is it creates the card object. Now, we haven't really done anything once we've created this card, so what we really want to do is we've created this list HTML that has all this HTML that would actually render the bug information out if we've done everything correctly. What we really want to do is we want to document dot get element by ID, and we want to get the listing element where we want the list of the bugs to show up, and that's this element right here, and we want to modify its inner HTML to be the list HTML. And so what this is going to do is uh, it's gonna populate the listing with this card stuff that we've just created, this card HTML that we just created. Now the problem is that we want to do this every time we enter a new bug. So every time something goes into the array, we want to kind of re-render this list HTML, right? We want to modify the inner HTML. And so what I'm going to do is every time at the end of the bug creation, I am going to actually run this function, which is rendered this bug list, or all the bugs that are actually in the array, right? And so in the register bug, after I've registered the bug and put the bug inside the list of bugs, this function called render bug list is going to execute, and this render bug list is going to create card objects based on how many bugs ever there might be in list of bugs, and they're going to list it out in as part of the listing element in the HTML document. So let's see this working. I'm going to clear the console. Let's have a name of the bug. If I turn it in, as you can see, now we have that bug show up over here. Now if I have another bug, let's say when I submit this, you'll see I have a second bug that shows up over here, right? And so as I enter bugs in here and turn them in, those bugs show up actually down here, right? And so with just two functions, right, the register bug function and the render bug list function, we are able to create a very simple form of bug issue tracker. You can consider this also like a task manager. There are lots of different uses for this kind of functionality. Basically, creating a form, and once you do something with the form, that changes something in the browser. There are a couple of other things that we can actually do over here. For instance, if I wanted to keep track of the overall number of bugs there might actually be, I could create let's create a function, for instance, number of bugs. In fact, yep. Let's say I have a function called number of bugs. I could say something like get element by ID. So I have an input. I have a div over here called number of bugs, and I could actually print out the number of bugs. And every time the list HTML is updated, I also run this function number of bugs. And what this number of bugs function does is I don't actually have to make it a separate function. I can kind of just throw this line in there and kind of keep updating the number of bugs, but there might be another reason to actually use number of bugs maybe somewhere else, and so I could build it as just as a separate function. And so what this will do is now I'm just kind of gonna right? It has like this active counter that allows me to keep track of the number of bugs that might be overall in the system, right? Just kind of a counter over here. So this very briefly is a way to build kind of a simple bug tracker, a simple issue tracker to keep track of issues. Obviously, there are lots of other things that we could do to this. For instance, um, we might want to add buttons that allow us to uh, uh, once a bug is done, might allow us to change the status of a bug. We might actually want to get rid of bugs. We might want to change the status of bugs. So there are lots of other things that this kind of skeleton allows us to do. They're not really something that I'm exploring right now, but this is something that y'all can maybe plan on building if you'll want to extend your ability in JavaScript by kind of trying new things. And so this concludes the brief demo of a bug or an issue tracker using JavaScript.